Hi there. So I'd like to welcome everybody. My name is Kimberley Duff, and I am the current president of Psi Beta National Honor Society in Psychology. And today I'm really happy to welcome Dr. David Copeland, who is a professor of psychology at University of Nevada, Las Vegas. Welcome, David.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here to chat with you.
So we're going to talk a little bit about careers in psychology and some practical success tips for undergraduate students. So maybe it'd be great if we could start out thinking about your own career path. So how did you pick psychology and what did your educational path look like?
Well, one of the things and I always share this story with my students, is because I did not come directly to psychology. I kind of stumbled into it. I originally had no clue what I wanted to do when I started my undergraduate years. Some high school teacher, I think, told me, "Well, you've taken a lot of science courses. You did well in math. Why don't you look in engineering?" So I took engineering, and in that first year, I knew that really wasn't, drawing out the passion, in me. And so at that time, I said, okay, let me just really start thinking about what I wanted to do. And psychology actually came into my head at that point because I'd taken one or two psychology courses in high school. I was lucky enough to have that opportunity, and I knew that I enjoyed it, but I really wasn't sure what I could do with it. So I was still like kind of thinking, okay, should I do something like chemistry? Should I do pre-med? What could I do? And so I thought to myself, well, let me take Psych 101 and kind of get into some of these psych courses. And, because I kind of like them anyway, and maybe I'll minor in it or something. And so I started taking the classes, and I started to like them more and more as I got into them. I'd take a course, and even like a course like research methods. I was like, oh yeah, this is kind of fun because, in my class, we were able to not only just write a paper, but we were able to do our own little mini project, a little group project where we collected data amongst each other in the class. And it really was when I took a course in cognitive psychology. And I took it from Mark Ashcraft, who had written a very popular, well-known cognition book that's been out there for a number of years. And it showed that he was so passionate about the field that he would write a book, because he was an excellent professor and he just pulled me into the material. And so he made concepts like memory and how memory can, have inaccuracies. He just brought those things to life. That was another course where I had to do a mini project in there. I think I did an aging thing where I collected data with a couple of my classmates and then with my grandparents to show, kind of an aging effect. But I really got so into it that I started chatting with him a little bit after class and things like that. And I think he saw some of my work and saw my interest. He actually was the one that invited me and said, "Hey, do you want to get involved with some research?" And that was, a wonderful, kind of the opportunity that got me in. And I started doing some work with him, and we'd have conversations, in the lab setting. And he really got me to the point where I was just like, this is something to keep, pursuing in graduate school. And he was like, great, okay, we'll do some digging, look at some programs, and come back, bring the list back to me, and I'll give you some feedback, my thoughts on it. And so I showed him my list, and there's a couple schools he's like, no, that's not a good fit for you. I know you have been working with you for a good year or so. And so then he says, have you thought about this one? And he threw a couple extra ones on my list. And so long story short, I applied to a handful of graduate programs in cognitive psychology. Ended up with an excellent mentor, Gabriel Radvansky, at Notre Dame. And so I spent about 5 years or so working with him. And essentially, he trained me as a mentor, and I learned to do what he was doing, as an academic in the, research, teaching, and service domains. And so I ended up just kind of, once I got the ball rolling with the path, I just kind of, stuck with it. And, to this day now, I'm associate professor in psychology, and, I enjoy what I do. So I'm happy that I ended up in this path.
I was going to say, it definitely shows you're happy. I think you're really fortunate, right? You pointed out you had mentors as an undergraduate and also as a graduate student, and having that mentor, I think, is really key to one's success.
Oh, definitely. And that's one of the things where when I look back on my kind of path, I find that I was lucky. I stumbled upon an excellent professor, who kind of pulled me in and invited me to work with research. but that wasn't something that I knew about at the time, in terms of being such a critical step for, preparing for, a graduate school pathway. And so, and one of the things is when I first started working as a professor after I finished my degree and moved out into, as a professional, I started seeing students out there who also didn't seem like they knew a lot of those steps. And so they weren't aware all the time of how impactful, student organizations, whether it's a Psi Beta, Psi Chi, or just a general psychology club, how something like that can be so impactful, because those organizations not only provide resources, but you get to interact with your classmates who are also probably high achieving students. And so you can learn from each other. You learn from this student, oh yeah, oh hey, this lab is great, let's, you should try to join work with me here. Or I got this volunteer position at this mental health clinic, come, work with, us there. Or I'm graduating and I know they're always looking for more people. If you're looking at PhD programs, research, is the end all be all, as in terms of undergraduate experiences. And even if you're not looking at PhD programs, research can be a great way to gain, develop your skills and to earn strong letters of recommendation for whatever your path might be. And so I saw that I'd stumbled, with luck, into, a lot of these opportunities, but I was seeing that not every student knew about these, especially students who were first generation students who didn't have maybe guidance from their parents. And so that kind of brought me to creating and developing an intro to the psych major course at my institution to help guide, for early psychology students to take, that would provide them kind of, a map, if you will, of all the opportunities that are out there. And as I kind of told you, in another conversation that we had, I was putting together materials and resources for my students that it kind of grew into the point where I had enough where I built a book, that students can access and refer to, that describes opportunities and careers and grad school preparation, all the things that they can take care of and do, whether they're in a community college level, whether they're in a four-year college, all these steps and opportunities that they can take advantage of to prepare for their future.
So it sounds like you're kind of paying it forward and continuing that mentoring. So tell us, what does a typical day look like for you? So your educational trainings in cognitive psychology, you're a professor at UNLV. So what would a typical day look like for you?
Well, the days vary a little bit because I have responsibilities that relate to research activities, to teaching activities, as well as service, which then refers to departmental activities such as, running maybe the subject pool in the department. So that's like one-on-one students can participate in experiments and researchers can advertise their experiments and collect data. Um, I've been the undergraduate director within our program for a number of years now, and that basically deals with updating the curriculum, making sure that there's, up-to-date courses, that there's clear paths and prerequisites. A lot of the little things that students don't think of, but it's kind of setting up the program for them. And that's on top of the normal teaching and research activities in which I typically will interact with students. And so I think, the days, besides those service activities that need to get done, here and there, it gets broken up between the research and teaching activities. And a lot of times I like to just balance the days where I'm doing a little bit of both in the day, where, spending maybe some of the time working with class or dealing with interacting with students, or, grading papers or homeworks. And then the other half of the day, maybe working with, on some type of research activity, whether it's guiding a student on their master's thesis or doctoral dissertation, or working on a project that I'm leading on, taking the lead on, within, amongst my grad students, where maybe I'm doing a lit review or planning a set of experiments that I want to do, across the whole study. And one of the great things about it is that research isn't, also involves students, whether it's undergraduates who are working with me and my grad students, or the grad students who are in my lab. And so one of the great things of working with students is that while they don't have as much experience on the research side, typically they have a lot of motivation and interest. And a lot of times that helps drive, the projects, because they're so curious to learn more, whether it's about the outcome of the experiment itself or actually running the project. And so it really helps to keep things motivated.
Well, great. And I think your excitement is contagious. I think the students can probably tell your excitement translates into that motivation. So you're talking about how to kind of mentor undergraduate students and even getting undergraduate students involved in research. And I know you and your co-author, Dr. Jeremy Huska, have this great book that just came out by Sage Publication called Success as a Psychology Major. And it's got some wonderful practical tips for students. If you could think about it, what would be some important advice that you would pass on to undergraduate students who, maybe they're thinking about majoring in psychology, but they're not sure yet, or they're maybe not sure what they could do as a career in psychology? What should they be thinking about now?
One of the things that I like to tell students is, well, there's actually a number of things, that I think I'll, fly through here with it is number one, give psychology, if you're thinking about psychology, give it some serious thought, because there's a lot of different things you can do with a psychology degree. It's not all therapy, counseling, and clinical psychology. There's a great deal of things. For example, I've had conversations with students who were blown away about the idea of industrial organizational, or IO psychology. They didn't know that that was a possibility. And some of the most positive feedback I've gotten from former students are students who've gone on, past students who've gone on to IO programs and have gone on, gotten great, had done, gotten great jobs and have started great careers. I also am amazed by the students who are especially now interested in forensic psychology. And so that one's a little bit different, because usually I'm reining them in a little bit more, because a lot of them have drawn their interest from TV or shows or movies. And so with them, it's a little bit about make sure you learn a little bit more about these particular paths, because it's not always accurately portrayed in those. And so you have to learn a little bit more. And a lot of times you're not necessarily getting a degree in forensic psychology, you're getting a degree maybe in clinical psychology and applying your work in a forensic setting. And so so I try to teach students, about there's a variety of pathways out there. And I also try to be honest with them, because I know I changed majors when I was a student, and I know it's perfectly fine to change majors as a student. And so I say, dive in and explore with the major and what you can do with it, because if it really isn't what, for you, you want to know that so you can change and go elsewhere. Yeah, I ideally hope that students aren't leaving psychology, but I want to be honest and say, hey, no one's keeping you here. If you find a better fit, go to it, follow that, that passion. But within psychology, one of the things I really get students to start thinking about, and one of the things I try to do in that book, is really expose them to the fact that there are so many different careers out there with, for psychology students. And it's, there's a good side to it and there's a bad side to it. There's so many options that you can almost do anything. But on the bad side is then you have to narrow that down and figure out what it is you want to do. Even if you're interested in the idea of helping others, from a mental health perspective, you've got to think about what's the best fit career-wise. Is it counseling? Is it therapy? Is it clinical psychology? Is it maybe psychiatry? And so I really try to push students to start thinking about what is it that you want to do? Think about the career aspect of it. What kind of population would you like to work with? What would you actually be doing? Jump over all the things about, the end of your undergraduate years, jump over grad school, even get to that career stage, figure out which one seems to be a good fit for you, and then work backwards from there to figure out, okay, well, that's what I want to do. Then what degree is going to get me there? And so, okay, a master's in counseling is going to be what gets me there. I don't need a PhD. Some students just think, oh, I need a PhD because I want to be a doctor and it sounds good. And I try to tell them, well, figure out if you need that. And if that degree is even going to allow you to do what it is you want to do. And so when they work backwards, they can start to figure it out. For example, it could be a big difference if students want to need to pursue a PhD in clinical psychology versus maybe a master's in counseling, as to the specific experiences that they have as an undergraduate. For those that are pursuing that PhD, they really need to get into research experiences, as an undergraduate. Those students who are pursuing the master's, they can do research, but is not as much of a necessity or requirement for them. And then in both of those cases, they probably want to do some kind of volunteer shadowing or internship in a mental health setting to kind of, get their feet wet, kind of experience, those kinds of environments. And so I really try to get them to start thinking about the future, because it can mean the difference of what it is they're going to focus on, in grad school and as an undergraduate to prepare for that future career. Those future career choices can also be a big difference too if they're going to choose a minor to complement their psychology major as well. So, for example, students who are maybe have interest in forensics might choose the minor in criminal justice or something like that. Students who are thinking about law might think of something like political science or philosophy. Those who are thinking about, oh, well, I think I'm going to do something in a business setting, maybe marketing or something like that. Well, then look at a marketing, minor or something like that. Look at something, but you want to be able to think to that end term, that long-term planning, because it can inform the opportunities that you dive into and the achievements you try to get done while you're a college student.
Yeah, and I think that's really good advice, right? Because you don't know what life is going to look like as a psychologist or any other career. So I like that you're saying kind of jump in, try all these different things, see what's a good fit for you. And at the end of the day, right, there can be lots of different paths to get to that same end career goal. So that's
Yeah.
really great advice.
And,
Yeah.
and a lot of times students aren't aware of what would make them a good applicant for whatever it is that they're applying for. A lot of students just assume, oh, if I get decent grades all through college, then I can just put down I got my bachelor's degree and I have the 3 point something GPA. All right, hire me. And they don't recognize the importance of things such as maybe skill development, something that could be, achieved by being maybe an officer in a student organization like Psi Beta or Psi Club or something like that. They don't understand the importance of developing skills, whether it be written and oral communication, like take the class from that professor who's recording a paper or a presentation, because that's a skill that you can develop. You might be able to ask, well, are you a good communicator in a future interview? And, anyone can say, yeah, I'm a good communicator. But that person who can then say, yeah, I'm a good communicator, that's evidenced by the fact that I wrote 3 papers in these different psychology courses. I wrote one on exploring group dynamics and prejudice. And, I wrote this other paper on this. And this is some of the feedback I got from my instructors. That's a little bit more concrete information that an employer or an applicant, a grad school applicant, admissions committee might look at and say like, oh, okay, that person actually demonstrated that skill.
Yeah, and I think that's really important. And I think no matter what experiences students get, even if they don't go into that particular field, I know I was one of those undergraduates who thought, I love people, I want to be a clinician or a counselor. And so I sought out experience. Actually, in Britain, I worked in a mental health facility. And I really liked it, but I realized it was not a good fit for me. It wasn't something that I would be able to do every day. But I didn't discount that experience because that still helps, right? And you can still put that on your resume or your CV, but it lets you also know that's not the career path that I want to go to. So I like you're suggesting, right, to get lots of different experiences.
Oh yeah, and like you said, with these experiences, even if you don't use them for your particular path, they're still going to be skill development. There's still an experience. And even if it, says, hey, that path isn't for me, it's better to learn that earlier rather than keep pursuing that path and say, learn down the line, oh wait, that's not for me. I wish I'd known that earlier. And so that's one of the importance of these, of getting these experiences, developing these skills, because you're preparing for your future. And that really motivated me to develop the class and to develop the book, was to be able to walk students through all these different things they should be keeping in mind as they're, going through all these college years, whether they're just starting or whether they're maybe in a later stage and just getting, a little bit firmer into the major. So.
Well, good. I think it's important for students to hear that. So thank you for that. So, if we get students excited about psychology, the next thing that people are concerned about is of course salary and job security. And I know this is a really unusual time right now, but what do you think is the job perspective right now for people either with psychological training or people who end up being a professional psychologist like you and I?
I think the jobs are going to be, it's going to depend on the specific path that a student's going to be taking. And so some jobs are just going to be a little bit more high paying than others. Typically, with a higher advanced degree, you're typically going to see a higher salary associated with it than maybe, so like PhD obviously is probably going to make a little bit more than someone just coming out with their bachelor's, but it can depend on a specific field. For example, some of the data that I've seen are that students who go into IO psychology, which are typically in business types of settings, are going to earn a little bit more than maybe students who earn a comparable master's, but in therapy. Maybe someone who's working as a therapist who has some business background or maybe a business minor or collaborates with a partner or something like that who can, develop their own practice, they might be able to earn a little bit more money than someone, who's just working for an existing practice that's out there. So it's going to depend. And I really encourage students to do some research out there and to learn a little bit about it. One thing that I really encourage them to do is to conduct what's called an informational interview. And I actually encourage them to do more than one if possible. A lot of them are just okay, checkbox, I did the one informational interview. But I really say, talk to more than one person, because different people might have different ideas or impressions about things. And one of the things I ask them about are, what are the pros and cons of the day-to-day job? What are some tips about preparing for this path? And I also ask them, like, what are some of the things, how flexible would you think that this particular job is in terms of like work-life balance? Is this a job where you're doing 12 hours a day and you never get to see a family? And that might be something that's good for some people, or maybe good while you're young, but maybe, if you're planning a family later, you might want, something that's a little more flexible work-life balance. Or I like to have the students ask, not what is your salary to the person, that to whom that, they're conducting the interview, because, most people are going to be a little shy about discussing the specifics, but to ask something like, what is the general expectation of a salary for someone who's starting in that field? And that a lot of people are open about, answering, somebody might say, oh yeah, typically it's a little low. People start around 30,000, when they're just getting started in that path, but there's room to grow. Or, oh yeah, those salaries are pretty good. You're typically, people starting, up above 70,000 a year, and they, there's, they can advance, as they get promotions or whatever, in that particular field. And so I encourage them to ask about that type of information. There are online resources that I suggest in the book as well, that, websites where you can look up information about careers and salaries. And, and if you want to know more about careers and the skills that are in there, you can go to a website like ONET, and that's one that's, digging in there. And probably my number one recommendation for students when you're digging about information for this, talk to the Career Center on your particular campus. Almost every single university or community college are going to have some type of career counselors or career center on there. They want to help their students get jobs, and they're even available typically to alumni of the particular school or institution. And students can go back afterward, even if they need help. But everyone that I've ever seen has been free for students. It's included in your tuition or student fees. So you might as well go use it. And a lot of times too, I'll talk to students and they'll be like, well, yeah, I went to there. And I said, well, go back. You got more questions. Maybe one time you talk about career possibilities. Maybe another time you go talk about internships or volunteer possibilities that are out there. Maybe another time you talk about, polishing that resume, and so they're there to help on so many different angles of the career search that I think, that's it's important for students to be taking advantage of those opportunities. And especially when this, COVID pandemic atmosphere right now, most of these career centers have moved to online appointments. So you don't even have to go physically to campus and, go to the, you just need to, set up a Zoom meeting or something, or a phone call, and they're there to help. So.
Yeah, I think all the career counselors are thankful for that shout out. And I know too, at community colleges, another great resource might be a transfer center, if the student's campus has that, because they can advise them too.
Oh yeah, the transfer centers, the academic advisors, all of those are great resources that sometimes students overlook, but they're things they should be looking into. Community colleges, if they're looking to transfer to another school later, plan it out so that you're taking courses that will transfer. If you're trying to plan out, let's say, a minor, work with an advisor to see, can you take care of general education requirements from your school, with that minor, and maybe you won't take any extra time whatsoever, and you'll actually be taking classes you like than these random courses that you just are required to take. You never know unless you ask.
That's true. And it's good for students to know, right? Because I know a lot of students will inquire of me as well, how much money will I be able to make as a psychologist? So it's good. The outlook is there. And I think, there's definitely going to be a need for all different types of psychologists, post-pandemic, and even during a non-pandemic time. It's a pretty secure job, I think, a secure career. But at the end of the day, we also want to be satisfied, right? And I think I was just reading some data that was recently collected showing that people in psychological careers actually experience a lot of job satisfaction. So if I can, let me ask you, you seem pretty happy. I think that's what's going to come across. But if you have to think about, what is the most rewarding thing for you in your career or your job? What is it that really kind of sustains you?
One of the things that I like about the job is that while some things stay the same, like you say, have the same kind of basic, teaching, research, service kind of activities, the projects can change, every single year. While my specialty area is in cognitive psychology, and I tend to study topics such as memory or how people learn from, stories or texts or things like that. There's nothing that says I have to continue doing that for the rest of my life. If I want to sit there and say, oh yeah, I'm interested in looking at what students are, alumni of our programs are doing for careers, I can do a research study on, something like that. If I want to, do a collaboration with someone from developmental psych and we kind of find some common ground between development and cognition, we can, put together a project there. One of the great things that I found is that cognitive psychologists are, have a reputation for being good for, straightforward, designers of experiments. And so I've had people who've collaborated with me from areas such as engineering, on like surprisingly transportation related types of, studies, looking at, whether people comply with safety belts and how that relates to maybe traffic accidents, how people learn in driver education types of programs, to all sorts of things applied to maybe like in a law or legal settings, where I've done some projects where I've had some grad student interest in there, and we've gotten some collaborators. I had a student who was very interested in comic books, and they're like, I love comic books, and I said, well, you know what? Let's figure out a way we can study that, because people can learn and comprehend from comic books, and let's see, maybe do a kind of study where we compare how people comprehend a story from a comic book versus a traditional text-based story, and let's just ask a question about that. And so the topics can vary, and that kind of keeps things fresh. But it's also, I think, the thing that really kind of gets me going is just students, and I think I mentioned this earlier, is just the motivation, the curiosity that you get from students. It's great, and especially when you see them actually taking steps and seeing their successes. For me, I think that's one of the things that I really, really most enjoy about the job. I love to hear from those students to say, oh, Dr. Copeland, I got into that graduate program that I was applying for, or, or hear back later, I, we just wanted to reach out and say, thank you for the tips. I ended up earning that master's degree and I'm working now. I just got a job, and I just wanted to say thank you for that. Those types of things, it's just, even though I know it's the student out there doing most of the work, just knowing that you helped in that little way to kind of, set them on that course, or to provide them some advice that they were able to apply in their lives. To me, that's one of the kind of the most rewarding types of things, from this particular career.
Well, that's great. So the students kind of become like your extended family. I know, I
Yeah.
know. I feel the same way. It's great when you're mentoring students and they email you back and say, I don't know if you remember me, and of course we do. And then
Yeah.
they share their successes. I think that's really wonderful. So this probably sounds like a great place to end our conversation. Do you have any parting words that you want to share, or any parting words of advice that you'd like to share with students?
Yeah, I think my probably biggest advice is, I think, even though you might feel like you're just starting college, you're just in the middle of trudging through, when am I going to, I'm halfway through, how am I going to get this degree? I just need to make it day by day. I think it's very important for students to start thinking about their futures. And, some students think, oh, I'll think about it when I graduate. I'll think about it, when I finish, or, I'll take a gap year and think about it. And my advice is, don't wait that long. Start thinking about it early. And that's one of the big reasons I wrote this book, is because I really wanted to give students a guide to start thinking about those futures, opportunities that they can take advantage of while they're in either community college or four-year college, or even high school students start thinking about their, long-term future. But you kind of want to tailor your path, for your goals. And so you want to be able to plan out, okay, I'm thinking about this particular goal. So I want to think about, okay, these are the types of courses or the minor I can do, for that particular degree. Or, it really makes sense for me to do some type of internship, and especially in this type of field, if available, because this is going to, give me relevant experience for my particular path. Or, if you really are at all thinking about that PhD, then it's very important to get into those research experiences, especially early, especially those students who are applying to those clinical PhD programs, which are just as competitive as medical school, in terms of probabilities of getting admitted. You really have to get that experience out there, and maybe just doing one semester at the end of your college years, is not necessarily probably going to cut it, when you're up against so many other high achieving students. And also for students to think about the fact that in most cases, they're going to be, if they're thinking about grad school, they're going to be applying for graduate school in that fall or winter of that senior year. And so they need to have a lot of those experiences already accomplished, or at least in progress, by the time they're writing up those applications. Because if you're planning to do it that last semester of your senior year, you haven't accomplished it yet, and you can't include it in those application materials. And so I think it's really important for them to get some early starts with it. But the final thing to kind of point out with that is I get some students who are reaching kind of the end of the road, and they're like, oh, I wish I had gotten some of this advice from you sooner. And one of the things I tell them is it's not too late. Just start doing things now. Take action, because, you can at least, improve yourself from where you currently are, put yourself on better footing, and you can make some, important decisions for yourself. If you really have a goal that want to pursue, take those steps now. If you need to delay graduation by one semester, delay graduation from semester, but at least it now, you're informed, and you can take that step. But if you start taking these steps early, then there is no delay in graduation. You can take these steps as you go and build up that CV, build up that resume for whatever goal it is that you might have.
Well, thank you. I know a lot of students probably sighed in relief there. This has been a really great interview. I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with me today. It's been really informative and very motivational. So again, I just wanted to thank Dr. David Copeland for sitting down and talking with us today.
Well, thanks for having this conversation and inviting me to chat with you. And I hope that some of this information can be very useful to the Psi Beta students who view this.
Thank you.